Brad, I realized something amazing.
Go on.
Next weekend on Friday, Tears of the Kingdom comes out, the new Zelda game.
True. Yes. I've heard of it.
Also on Friday, my wife and daughter are leaving for a weekend camping trip.
Huh.
So I'm going to go and tell you, full goblin mode, 100%.
Okay.
Just like I got to figure out what kind of food I'm ordering, and I'm just going to like put on some comfortable pants, maybe.
Do you ever feel, okay, I mean, people will definitely get this sense in the episode to come that, you know, the universe is typically cold and unfeeling and without compassion or logic, but every so often reality just aligns in a way that is...
Look, if serendipity is the only thing that brings a small amount of joy in an otherwise cold and uncaring universe, I say embrace the chaos.
Just enjoy it when it comes. Anyway, sounds like you have a weekend ahead of you.
Yeah, I got to figure out my food strategy, though. In the old days, I would have just ordered a couple of big pizzas and then, you know, goblined out on those for 3 days.
Is it goblin? Okay, are there tiers?
I think there's a tier structure. Yeah.
Okay. There's goblin mode. Where does gremlin fall? I tend to think of gremlin as even more intense than goblin.
Oh, I assumed goblin mode was the bottom of the pile, but maybe you're right. Maybe gremlin's worse.
I've heard the term gremlin energy recently, and I feel like it's even more dire or sinister.
Sometimes I worry, especially since I've been spending time on Blue Sky lately, that I'm completely out of the vernacular that the children are using on the internet these days.
Well, the children are no longer on Twitter if they ever were. So I think I'm with you on that at this point.
Yeah, but so yeah, like feral was the original one for me. Like I'm unsupervised. It's not even that I'm unsupervised, but like I don't have any other commitments for a period of time. I would go feral in the old days, but I feel like goblin mode is one step beyond that, where it's just like, you know, all other bets are off. And then, you know, like I have computer maintenance stuff that I've been putting off for ages because I never have time to do it when I'm not using the computers on the day to day. And I was like, I could just do that. Then I realized that the stars have aligned and I can go Korok seed hunting instead. So
you can't waste this opportunity. Fixing computers, decidedly not goblin mode.
No, that's a useful activity that good contributors to society will do.
Are we now going to start trying to one up each other though on the scale of degeneracy of food and video games and not cleaning the house? There's goblin mode. There's gremlin energy. I'm going owlbear status, man.
Look, I'm just alphing it up over here. It's just me and a bunch of cats doing weird Alf business. Welcome to Brad and Will Made a Tech Pod. I'm Will.
I'm Brad. Did you have now coined the term Alf style?
Alf style?
Yeah.
Look, I don't think I invented anything to do with Alf after the last week on the alternate Twitter post-Twitter social network, Blue Sky.
You know, is Alf invented or discovered? Who can say?
I mean, it's Alf is really all of us, is what I've learned. Speaking of alien life forms and things from space. Mm-hmm. I'm so excited about our guest this week. Dr. Katie Mack is a theoretical astrophysicist who studies a range of questions in cosmology. She currently holds the position of Hawking Chair in Cosmology and Science Communication at the Perimeter Institute for Theoretical Physics, where she carries out research on dark matter and the early universe and works to make physics more accessible to the general public. You most likely know her from her presence on social media, where she provides context and clarity on a broad variety of science topics, or from her 2020 book, The End of Everything, Astrophysically Speaking.
How have you found people respond to the subject matter of the book? I mean, people thinking about the end of all existence, is that something that inspires mortal terror in people?
Sometimes, yeah. So there is a healthy dose of mortal terror that comes in. Yeah, it's interesting. Like, a lot of people are just kind of fascinated by the ideas, I guess, and a lot of people are they're a little bit nervous about the whole concept. And and so it just really varies. But I definitely get a lot of messages from religious people with various objections to the idea of the end of the universe, or claiming that their own religious text completely supports what's in the book, which is interesting because they're all different religious texts. So every religious text apparently is supported in one way or another by what's in the book. So that's been kind of amusing to see them all kind of coming in and being like, well, this proves that mine is right. And it's like, well, let me tell you what I got last week. So that's been really interesting. And some people are just really very, very certain about their own sort of ideas about the end of the universe or lack of end of universe, and they share those with me as well.
I find the whole idea that, entropy comes for us all in the end kind of comforting, because it means that no matter how much I screw up on the day to day, ultimately it's not going to matter, right? Like it's
yeah, nothing's going to matter.
Is that kind of a healthy nihilism, maybe?
I mean, I guess for me, I do feel like it kind of reminds me that, you can't really hold on to stuff, and you have to sort of live in the moment to some degree and appreciate life as it's happening, because there's no alternative that makes any sense.
I don't know if this is like a psychological quirk that's unique to me, but thinking about, 5 billion years from now, the planet will most likely be swallowed by the sun. I think actually something I was going to ask, do I understand that even like 3-4 billion years before that, the planet will no longer be able to support life due to just the sun heating up? Is that correct? So we actually only have like a billion years?
Yeah, we have about 1 billion years before the oceans boil away. So, however you want to try and survive that, that's going to be a big challenge in terms of global warming. But so it's about 5 billion years, about 1 billion years. The estimates vary a bit for the oceans boiling, and then the sun goes red giant within about 5 billion years. And probably, well, it's a little unclear exactly what happens to the Earth's orbit at that point, but most likely it'll kind of spiral in eventually. There's a chance that it could wander off instead, but the most likely thing is spiraling in. And in any case, it's certainly cooked before any of that happens.
This weird quirk of mine is that I hear things like that and like I instantly seize up, it's like, oh no, the end is coming for us. And then I think like, oh, it's 1 billion years from now, we have plenty of time. Yes. And it's like, if this was 150 years from now, it wouldn't matter to me. But somehow I like get terrified by it until there's some weird like lizard brain versus rational mind thing going on.
Oh yeah, no, it's super like disturbing in ways that really don't make rational sense, because, I mean, I think the thing is that people have developed strategies for dealing with the idea of mortality, and all of them involve some kind of legacy, right? Like some kind of idea that like something of us lives on into the future and makes a difference. And if you take that away, it's a lot harder to deal with non-existence of yourself personally, because then you're also taking away whatever purpose you thought you had in the universe, because that goes away, right? Like whatever consequence you might have had goes away. So I think that's a lot harder to deal with.
It's interesting because like when I asked you to come on the podcast, Kate, when you said, hey, you want me to come on your podcast? I didn't think we'd be talking about metaphysical stuff, and existentialist dread. But I'm curious what drew you to the hey, I want to study the very, I want to know what happens when the electron soup breaks down at the end of the universe, and what was the appeal for you?
So I've been studying cosmology for many years. So when I started in graduate school, I knew I wanted to study cosmology, and so that includes all of those big questions. And I mostly thought I was going to work on like the early universe and stuff like that, and dark matter, dark energy, all these big mysteries. But I found that I kept running into these really interesting research problems around the end of the universe, and not things that I worked on specifically, but things like papers I read or talks I attended where people talked about some of these sort of universe ending ideas. And I just found that I was really, really fascinated by all of that, and really really sort of excited by the idea of understanding the destruction of the cosmos as much as the production of it. And so when I was thinking about what I might like to write a book about, I thought about all the talks that I give that touch on the end of the universe and how much fun it is to talk about the end of the universe. And I thought, well, if it's fun to talk about it to an audience, and if audiences enjoy it, then clearly this is a good topic for a book. And there had not been a sort of comprehensive end of universe book in a while of the kind that I was thinking of writing. So it just all kind of made sense.
I know the book's not that old, but has any more certainty developed in the, say, what is it, 2-3 years since it came out in terms of which one is the one? I assume that probably takes longer.
there hasn't been any more certainty. There have been more sort of questions that have arisen. So one of the things that I talk about in the book is like places where we have some confusion about cosmology, about stuff that we don't understand that might or might not be pointing us toward like a better theory of the universe. And that includes things like the Hubble tension, which is this question of how quickly is the universe accelerating in its expansion, or well, specifically, how quickly is it expanding now, right? Like what is the rate of expansion of the universe? And that's still controversial. There are different measurements that give you different answers about the rate of expansion. And I thought maybe by the time the book came out, that would be answered, and it has not been answered. So that remains a big question. And then, with JWST out there looking at these very, very, very early galaxies in the universe, it's also finding some things that are confusing about, possibly seeing galaxies that are too bright too soon. So maybe galaxies are forming faster and bigger than we thought they should be, which doesn't really necessarily challenge a cosmological model, but is a question about galaxy formation that we don't understand. So stuff like that is still, everything just gets more confusing. we haven't solved any problems. We've just made new ones, basically.
As far as the rate of expansion goes, I hope I'm not getting too into the weeds here, but is it at least agreed on at this point that it is increasing? And is it just a disagreement over how fast it's increasing? Or is there still, is that at least a settled component?
It's very clear from many different measurements that the expansion of the universe is speeding up. It is not clear why, and we have very little understanding of what it is that's making the universe speed up in its expansion. But the fact that it is expanding and accelerating is pretty much a settled point at this stage.
So the increasing expansion does that also kind of implies another type of end, right? Even before the sort of like physical or cosmological end, in the sense that things will become less observable over time from any given point. Is that accurate?
Yeah.
That billions, I don't know, trillions, however many years from now, that any one given galaxy is just going to be able to observe less than we could right now. Is that accurate?
Yeah, absolutely. So our a good estimate is that in about 100 billion years, we will not be able to see other galaxies in the universe. So,
wow.
So there's a caveat there, which is that there's a local group of galaxies that we're part of, and that's a group that sort of formed together. And so that group is merging over time. And so we're going to merge with the other galaxies in that group within only like 4 or 5 billion years. But then after that, there's all the galaxies outside of our sort of immediate gravitational influence will become, essentially what's going to happen is they'll be really far away, but also they'll be moving away from us really quickly. And it's really the latter that makes it so that they'll be impossible to see. So as the universe is expanding, it's redshifting the light of distant galaxies. So when things that emit light move through space, as they're moving away, it stretches out the light basically and puts it to the redder part of the spectrum. If they're moving toward you, it gets bluer. And so that's cosmological redshift. That's the term we use for that. So the cosmological redshift of all of the distant galaxies in the universe is going to get higher and higher and higher. So the light is going to be stretched out to radio and then to, unobservable long wavelengths of light, basically lost in the cosmic background radiation. And so it will not be possible to observe other galaxies in about 100 billion years. And so in that time, like if you took a space telescope like JWST and you put it out there in 100 billion years and you tried to take pictures of the early universe, you would just see nothing. It would just be black. And it's fascinating because at that point there will be essentially no evidence for the Big Bang either, because we won't be able to see the cosmic microwave background radiation anymore. We won't be able to see the light from other galaxies. We'll just be sort of alone in this empty space.
This may be way too much Star Trek talking on my part, but I always feel like, we drew the short straw being relatively early in the evolution of the universe, right? Because we could have so much more technology. Maybe there would be other intelligent species to encounter, blah, blah, blah. But it almost actually seems like maybe civilizations that come way later actually have it way worse, right? Because you run into that problem you're describing, or even people that are around at the end of the universe. Like, presumably there's not going to be much they can do technologically about that.
Yeah, I mean the energy density of the universe is just decreasing over time, right? So like you're gonna run out of energy to do stuff with if you wait too long. I don't know what I would say is like the best time. I mean, if we wanted to be in the heyday of star formation, right, then we would have existed maybe like 6 or 7 billion years after the beginning. So we're already the universe is already well past its prime in that sense, and it's kind of it's a little bit disturbing when you go through the numbers on that, because so there was this peak of star formation, and then since then the amount of star formation has been going down, and that's for a couple of reasons. One is that galaxies are kind of using up the gas that's within them to form stars, but also galaxy collisions and interactions are reducing in they're not happening as often because clusters and groups are getting moved farther apart from each other, and so we can look at that cosmic star formation history, and we can calculate how many stars have formed in the universe so far and how many will form in the future based on the amount of gas that's left and the amount of interaction that's going to happen in the future. And what we find is that of all the stars that have ever formed or ever will form, about 90 or 95% have already happened.
Oh, wow.
And so from now until the end of time, we're working on that last like 5 or 10% of star formation. So we're almost done.
So then that implies to me that there's a sweet spot where enough stars have formed and blown up that there's heavy elements in the universe, but then there's still enough energy left for new stars to form. So maybe we are in the sweet spot right now. Maybe this is the good time.
I mean, that's a little bit dependent on the kind of environment you're into, because if you're in like the center of a rich galaxy cluster, for example, then you get a lot more star formation, a lot more generations of stars. If you're out in the in the weeds, like in a galaxy that's not surrounded by other galaxies, and then you have it sort of takes longer to enrich that space. So the best thing to do if you want a lot of heavy elements and also continuing star formation is to be in a cluster where there's just a lot of matter going on, and you can start out earlier in that cluster and still have heavy elements to work with, and also as the universe is winding down, if you find those galaxy clusters, there's still going to be some stars in them. It's what you don't want is to be kind of out in the void in one of these sort of more empty spaces in the universe.
One of my favorite things to do with people when we're sitting looking at stars late at night, and if they're not sciencey people, is to talk about stars exploding and forming everything that's heavier than the hydrogen and the helium and the gases, and it seems the two ideas seem very counter, right? Like that the space between stars is large enough that it's infinite to human brains, although small on the galactic scale. And B, that all of the stuff that we're made of came from some exploding star, light years and light years away. And I wonder, like, is it's because of the time, right? It's because we can't grasp the time, the scale of time involved.
Yeah, so part of it is the time. It's just that, you have enough time for all that matter to diffuse around the galaxy. But part of it also is that the galaxy kind of mixes around, like the stars that are around us now are not the same stars that were around us earlier in the history of the galaxy. So like our sun has been traversing the galaxy and over time, and the sort of the mix of stars and gas and dust and stuff around us has been changing. So there's mixing that goes on that's not just like everybody's sitting still and waiting for matter to diffuse around. There's also a lot of sort of churning within a galaxy. So it's both of those things, really.
We're scooping up as we move through the galaxy, basically.
Yeah, like we're moving through different regions of the galaxy, and the stuff that our sun was made of, was in sort of different environments in the past. So it's kind of a combination of things. But when galaxies come together, a lot of gas comes in from other regions, right? So everything kind of comes in, churns around, flattens out into a disk, and then you get stars forming. So there's a lot of mixing that happens. That's not just like you have to wait, for the stuff from billions of light years away to come to you or something. That's not what's happening.
Will's just kind of given me the idea of and this probably, I'm sure this is relevant to you as kind of a science communicator outside of your research and your day job, just speaking to the public of sort of assembling like a short list of the exotic but fairly easy to understand ideas that could really pique people's interest in this kind of thing. Like what Will said about, hey, all the atoms in your body are billions of years old and came out of stars, except like the hydrogen is basically as old as the universe, right?
Yeah.
Now I'm sitting here thinking of like time dilation and relativity is one that I found that if you're talking to somebody who has no idea about astrophysics and you're just like, hey, did you know that the faster you go, the slower time goes compared to somebody who's at rest?
Yeah.
And it just like, you just see brains exploding. And I feel like you could probably come up with like a good short list, right, of things that are just like, if you just throw out these nuggets, people could really just like start thinking about like all of reality in a different way, right?
Yeah, I put all of those in my book, which means that now I can't write another book about cosmology because I used up all the good stuff. So my new book is going to be about particle physics because I haven't used all those yet. But the thing about relativity, I had one of the most surreal moments of my life was I was at a conference and I met an astronaut. We were talking about it was a conference that was sort of about science communication and stuff, and we were talking about relativity. Because I told him I was an astrophysicist, and we were talking about time dilation, and so I was kind of explaining that concept of when you're moving quickly, your time is going more slowly, but also when you're farther away from the center of from a gravitational well, your time is moving more quickly. So there's these two things, and I was explaining this, but like using the example of his lived experience.
Yeah, he's gone 18,000 miles an hour for a significant period of time far from the center of the Earth. And wow.
It was just
that's fabulous.
That doesn't usually happen to me. Usually this is totally a thought experiment. But in this case, it was like, no, this is what happened to your body.
Well, right, because the Kelly twins were on the space station one was up for a year and one wasn't, right? So
yeah.
So he's younger than his brother at this point,
well,
potentially.
Yeah, I mean, the departure from the womb is the difference there is much more significant than however many microseconds or whatever you get from or milliseconds, I think it is. But those processes are always happening, and you can calculate how much it is if you're doing something like orbiting the Earth every 90 minutes.
That's funny.
Yeah.
So pretty broad question here, but like what is exciting to you in cosmology at the moment? I mean, obviously JWST is big in the news, but is there anything else maybe that's like less in the spotlight in terms of research or theory or anything that is just kind of the thing you're excited about right now?
Oh, there's so much going on. So one of the things that's really exciting is, so as you say, we're getting these amazing images of the early universe or the sort of early galaxy formation stages of the universe. And that's really exciting because we're learning about how the first galaxies might have formed and the processes around that. And we're, just getting a better idea of the evolution of the universe. But one of the things that's really exciting that I think isn't talked about quite so much right now is gravitational waves. So, the first gravitational wave detection happened in, I think, 2017 or something, where they detected two massive black holes in a galaxy of a billion light years away or something, colliding with each other, and that's, that was an amazing achievement because the level of precision you need to do that experiment at to get that data is just astonishing. Like, it's amazing what they were able to measure, and they were able to sort of measure the movement of space itself as these black holes are colliding in another galaxy. Like, just amazing stuff, right? So that experiment, the LIGO experiment, and a couple of others, Virgo is one of them as well. Those experiments have been just taking data for the last several years, and now they've seen many collisions of black holes. They've seen collisions of neutron stars that then form black holes, presumably, as they collide, and in the process create these what's called a kilonova, which is a burst of radiation in various parts of the spectrum. And we've seen that radiation. We saw an event where the neutron stars collided. LIGO saw the collision through gravitational waves, and then a bunch of telescopes saw like the afterglow or the explosion in a bunch of different wavelengths. So that was really cool. But anyway, it's kept going, and there have been some events that might be like a neutron star and a black hole, which is pretty cool. And there are events that suggest black holes at masses that we didn't think black holes should be forming at, which is also really interesting. And so we're getting a ton of information about black holes and neutron stars, and just like the evolution of objects in the universe. But there's a new experiment. It's not really a new experiment. It's an experiment that's been going on for a long time, that's looking for gravitational waves in a different way. And there's rumors that there might be new data from that coming soon. So this is called a pulsar timing array. And what it does is it looks at a whole bunch of pulsars in various parts of the sky and just watches the click of these pulsars. So pulsars are neutron stars that are rotating very, very rapidly. They have radiation coming out of one of the poles, and the radiation pole and the rotation pole are not lined up. And so the radiation sweeps past the Earth at regular intervals. And some of these are like in milliseconds. So they're rotating really, really quickly, and you get these millisecond pulses. Some of them are longer, seconds, whatever, between pulses. But there's a whole range. And these pulsar timing arrays use radio telescopes to monitor all these pulsars, and they look for changes in the timing as gravitational waves pass between us and the pulsar, or pass through that space. And so the idea is that you'd get this like time dilation effect as the pulsars are coming, the pulses are coming, and it would change the timing in a predictable way. And you can look for a background of gravitational waves from populations throughout the universe, or from early universe processes, or various other things. Or you can look for gravitational waves that are coming from the collisions of much more massive black holes. And so those experiments have been going on for years. And there have been like a couple of little hints of like maybe something cool is coming out of that, but they didn't really know how to interpret it. And so there's new data coming apparently soon that might also be really, really interesting and show us something cool there. So, I mean, it gets a little esoteric, I guess, but I'm really excited about what we're learning from, like, not observing the light from processes in the universe, but observing the effect of those processes on like the motion of space itself. Like, just the fact that we can do that at all is really, really cool.
Yeah, the fact that we can do that an astronomical tool that we have now is that we can measure the shape of space is an absolute trip.
Something that really impresses me is the ingenuity that goes into, because observational ability is so limited to look at things directly, the ingenuity of kind of using other not really related, features or bodies as reference points? Like, is it the Type 1a supernova that was used to measure like redshift and
the dark energy,
right,
the accelerated expansion of the universe?
Right.
Yeah,
and like the thing you're talking about with pulsars here, it's like you have such a limited toolbox being on this tiny planet with all this interference and stuff that you kind of have to use everything you have at your disposal as a reference against everything else. Like, it's kind of amazing to see that level of ingenuity in coming up with this kind of experimentation.
Yeah. I mean, it's super cool. Like, I love how creative you get to be in cosmology, where you can say, well, I'm interested in this weird thing that theory says might happen. What are the tools available to me? What can I look at? And what would the consequences of that theory be in terms of all these things that I can look at? And then you try and match that up. That's an area of research called phenomenology, and that's sort of where I work. Like, I don't make up the new theories of weird stuff happening in the universe, and I don't do any of the observations. Like, I never touch data at all, basically. But I sit in the middle, and I ask the question, like, if this thing is happening that the theory says might happen, what would we see? What would we see with new telescopes or with new experiments? And how can we best optimize the experiments and the observations to see those cool, weird things, right? So, for example, when I was in grad school, I was working on a project about cosmic strings, which are these hypothetical like strings of energy that might stretch through the universe in this weird sort of network. And sometimes they would sort of bud off these little loops of string, and these little loops would kind of vibrate and radiate away energy in either particles or gravitational waves. There's this whole complicated thing that may or may not be happening. And cosmic strings are predicted by certain theories, not others. They're considered exotic and sort of speculative. And I was interested in this, how you would search for these, how you would put constraints on the existence of these things. And I had been talking a lot with radio astronomers about other things. And so I worked out, like, well, okay, what if you look for the way that these little loops of strings would distort the space around them and then change what you see with these distant radio sources that are useful for completely different purposes, right? And so we were able to write up a paper looking at like constraints on these cosmic strings through what new radio telescopes might or may not see. And so it, and these are completely unrelated things. Like the sources of these radio signals are like, galaxies that have supermassive black holes in them and are, have an accretion disk and are creating radio waves from that. Cosmic strings have no relation to that at all, but you might be able to use the two together to learn something about the early universe. So that kind of thing is really, really fun for me.
So I have not even looked at anything about string theory in like a decade. So this is woefully out of date, I'm sure, but I feel like I remember reading one of the big objections was that it was kind of untestable at the time, that there was kind of no way to verify it. Has that changed? Is that what you're describing here? Sounds like is there more of an observational capacity there now, or?
Well, so there's a difference between string theory and cosmic strings.
Okay.
So cosmic strings are a more generic kind of phenomenon where it's technically called a cosmic defect, topological defect, where there's it's something that affects sort of the configuration of space-time in its vicinity. And there are several things that can create cosmic strings, and some of them have to do with very early universe processes like cosmic inflation. Some of them have to do with things like string theory. But the observational consequences, they're affected a little bit by the origin of these strings, but they're not necessarily determined. So if we found cosmic strings, depending on what we saw, then they might be something that points us toward a kind of string theory. But they might not. It depends on their properties. String theory itself, as a sort of model, is it's a really interesting thing. So it was designed as a way to connect quantum mechanics and general relativity, Einstein's theory of gravity, and it's a quantum gravity theory. And it was sort of written as to be sort of a theory of everything. And the early versions of string theory were all based on like supersymmetry, which is another kind of, it's like an extension of the standard model of particle physics that hypothesizes a whole new set of models of particles that are related to the particles that we have. I mean, so I'm not a string theorist. I don't know too much about the history here, but my understanding is that there's a connection between supersymmetry and certain models of string theory, and we haven't seen any evidence of supersymmetry. And so where that leaves string theory is a little unclear in terms of like there's I don't really know what we can say about string theory at the moment, because there's still people are constantly working on various aspects of string theory, but in kind of different contexts and with different goals. And at the moment, finding like testing these theories in a comprehensive way, would require doing experiments that reach into that quantum gravity regime, which is not something that we can do. So you need to do an experiment where you're going to such high energies that gravity is important, and we can't do that with current technology. Or we need to find observations that connect with regions of space or times in the cosmic history where both quantum mechanics and gravity are important. And again, we don't have access to that easily. That doesn't mean that we'll never find ways to test these things or to rule out certain models. And there are lots of hypotheses about how you can sort of put constraints or rule out different kinds of models. But also there are lots and lots of models in string theory that have lots and lots of different predictions, and so it's a little bit difficult to really like say yes or no on that.
I was going to ask, like, one of the things that's always fascinating to me is the idea that, like there's consensuses, right? Like the consensus changes over time about what is the best understanding we have. And it's like when you read about that stuff in history and history of science books, it's always like, well, and then all of a sudden Galileo did this, and we're like, oh, well, here we go. Everybody agrees. But in reality, it's that transition is always a lot messier, and we're kind of always living through them, right? At least in our modern age, things have changed. Like I was born in 1975, and our understanding of how the universe works is dramatically different now than it was when I was born 46 years ago.
Yeah.
Wow.
It's a complicated thing, like to explain like how our understanding changes, how the consensus changes, because I think it can happen in a few different ways. One of them can be just sort of a slow evolution toward a new understanding, but also we can have situations where a new observation or a new explanation comes up that kind of takes the field by storm. And it doesn't mean that everybody immediately changes their mind, but you can have a lot of excitement about a particular idea that can have a lot of influence. So, for example, when the accelerated expansion of the universe was discovered, fairly quickly, I would say, astronomers and physicists had to grapple with the idea that the universe is accelerating, and we might have this cosmological constant as an element of cosmology. And it took, this was sort of before my time as a professional astronomer, but it took many years before it was really, really accepted that this is how things likely are. And so now when you look at recent textbooks, they kind of just assume that dark energy is real, that it's a cosmological constant, and look at other possibilities, but with that as the default. Whereas in older textbooks, those that were written in the sort of 1980s, 1990s, it was considered as maybe a possibility, but not the likely one. So it takes some time, and that was a pretty definitive observation. That was a pretty clear thing. Like, this is really strong support that the universe is accelerating its expansion. Won a Nobel Prize several years later. Like, it was clear that this was a big deal. So sometimes stuff like that happens where you have evidence that's so powerful that you have to kind of accept it. But then, with other things, it might be that there's just kind of a slow evolution toward a different understanding of how things work. And if it's not if it's not sort of ground shaking like the dark energy thing, then it's not always clear that it's changed. So an example of that is like when I talk to people about the very early universe and the Big Bang, a lot of people imagine the Big Bang to have been like a singularity that then exploded outward and, created all of space. And then, maybe at some point it's going to collapse again and recollapse into a singularity and then start a new universe. And none of that is likely based on our current understanding, right? Like, so maybe there was a singularity. We don't actually have any evidence of that. That there are certain arguments in general relativity that would suggest there should have been one at some point, but our current models of the early universe really don't work unless something happened in the very early universe that looks nothing like a singularity. So we have this idea of cosmic inflation, which is where at very early times the universe accelerated in its expansion very, very rapidly and kind of emptied out the universe, and then a process filled it with radiation. And then we see the hot radiative phase of the universe as the cosmomicrowave background radiation.
And that's what we can literally look at with the JWST.
That's what we can actually. It's not with JWST. It's with microwave telescopes like the Planck telescope, WMAP, COBE back in the day. There are telescopes that see microwave radiation, and there's a background light. There's light that everywhere you look in the universe, there's this background of microwaves, and that background light is what that is that you're looking so far away that you're seeing part of the universe that is still on fire. Like from your perspective, you're looking so far back in time that you're looking at a part of the universe that's so far away from you, so far back in time that it's within the first, a few 100,000 years of the universe, and the universe is still on fire from that hot radiative phase. So that's astonishing. We can talk about that for days. But the thing is that the properties of that light that we see make it really clear that it can't be just that there was a singularity and then the universe was hot and dense immediately, and that's that hot dense universe that we see. There had to have been something between the singularity and that background light and that hot phase. Or maybe the singularity didn't happen at all, but you can't just go straight from singularity to that hot phase in a way that makes sense with our understanding of physics. So this cosmic inflation thing probably happened. We don't know for sure. There are other explanations. But the popular understanding of the early universe is like, oh, there was a singularity, then there was the fireball, and then, but that's not how it is at all. And then also, we're not going to collapse into another singularity in the future, most likely. In the 1960s, that was kind of the best understanding that we have, that we're headed toward a big crunch. But as far as we know, that's extremely unlikely at this point, because the universe is accelerating in its expansion. It's not going to fall back down, right? As far as we know. So that understanding is very clear within cosmology, but it absolutely is not filtered out into the public. Like a lot of people, as I've been talking to people about my book and stuff, a lot of people thought that the universe would collapse and that was it, right? And then the idea that the universe would collapse and then bounce and become, a new Big Bang, that's really difficult to do actually in physics, like theory wise. Like it's reasonable to get the equations to create a big crunch if you have the right conditions, but then a big crunch to a Big Bang is not a transition that it makes sense within that with that theory. So you have to work in all sorts of other things to try to get a bounce to happen. And there are theories that'll do that, but it's not straightforward and not sort of what we call generic. So that whole story that people have about like the singularity and then this, and like none of that is actually how we talk about the early universe now. So it's kind of fascinating how somebody told a really good story about that, in the sort of 1980s, mostly Stephen Hawking, and people latched on to that story. But when the story changed, as far as our understanding goes, it did not filter out. So it's really, that doesn't quite answer your question about like the change of understanding within the field, but it's kind of like sometimes these stories can persist even if the science carries on and changes how we think about stuff.
Yeah, I think it's complicated is a fair answer, right?
Yeah.
It turns out, who knew, right?
Yeah.
Katie, I'm curious, like, what's the day-to-day like for an astrophysicist? If you're like, do you just sit around? Are you is it just a lot of time thinking and reading and hanging and like what's yeah, because you said you're not looking at data, you're not doing math, and I'm like, where?
I didn't say I'm not doing math. I said I'm not coming up with new theories.
Okay.
Some of my colleagues are just coming up with new theories, but we're kind of all doing math one way or another.
Okay, that makes me. I was worried. If we're not doing math, I maybe made a mistake when I was deciding what I was going to do with my life.
No, so when I first started, or when I first decided I wanted to get into cosmology, my picture of what a physicist does, or was that like, I would go to a little room with a blackboard, and I would just fill that blackboard with equations all day, and then I would have eureka moments and discover the meaning, I discover everything there is to know about the universe through a process of like mathematics and will, right? Like that was my picture of how physics went.
That's how it's depicted in film generally, I think.
Yeah, no, it is. And that's a big problem. And I mean, there's that. And then the other thing that people think of is like, everybody's just kind of like sitting around being like, what if the universe was shaped like a football? Like, ooh, dude, like it's kind of like we're just sort of making stuff up and being like, oh, that would be neat. None of it's like that. In terms of the day-to-day, it's certainly a lot more collaborative than I ever thought it was when I first started. Like I spend a lot of my time in, group meetings or seminars or, talking over lunch with other cosmologists about new ideas and, bouncing ideas off each other to come up with projects or, answer questions about phenomena, or like say, oh, I saw this paper about this thing. What do you think of that? Like, so there's a lot of sharing ideas, a lot of discussion, a lot of going to seminars, a lot of giving talks about research in progress or research that's been completed. And then there's a lot of reading papers. So reading papers that other people have written. There's the archive, which is it's this online preprint server, but it's not just preprints. It's like if you write a paper, like if I complete a calculation, I finish a project, and I want to share my results, what I do is I write up a paper and I submit it to a journal, right? But either at the same time or shortly before or shortly after submitting to the journal, I put it on the archive, which is an online repository for like all knowledge in physics, so there, and it goes there. And then if you're a researcher in the field, then you can browse through the archive every morning and see the new papers that have been posted. There are a lot, though. There's like in astrophysics alone, you get like 90 papers a day or something. So it's impossible to keep up with everything. But that's one of the ways that, we can see what people have been doing. Then we go to conferences and hear about projects that way. And there's a whole sort of process of just keeping up with what everybody else is doing in the field. And then in terms of the actual like work part, for me, that's mostly most of the stuff I do is like I'll go through the literature. I'll figure out like what it is I'm trying to understand. I'll do a lot of kind of jotting down equations and things on paper and doing some sort of rough calculations. And then I'll use I'll use a computer to actually solve these equations and do calculations. So I'll write up a code that calculates. So for example, in my research group right now, we're working with a code that calculates what happens if dark matter particles come together and annihilate with one another, and then produce a sort of shower of high energy particles, and then what happens if that occurs inside the gas in which the first stars and galaxies are forming, and where does that energy go, and how does it heat the gas, and then how does that affect the process of star formation, and so on. And then so you can you can put together a whole code package to figure that out, and then you can put that together with other code packages that figure out like what telescopes would see. And then we can make predictions for the signals that we'd see in radio telescopes that are looking for evidence of the sort of process of star formation through the universe. So there's those kinds of things. So it's a whole lot of code. And when I first started, it was all Fortran. And I didn't start that long ago. I mean, this is like the 90s, 2000s. We were using Fortran 77. And then eventually, eventually you stop having to use, your older advisor's code, and you can write your own code. And so you do that in C or C++. And then lately, there's my students and are mostly using Python or Julia, but there's kind of this process of you still, like, some of the stuff we do still has Fortran in it because we're using like libraries that other people put together. So there's this kind of long string of horrible code that goes back for generations.
Dependency nightmares. That's fantastic.
Yes. Yeah. So then anyway, so we write code, we produce plots, we write papers. So I sit in front of a computer most of the day. And when I'm not in front of the computer, I'm meeting with colleagues or reading papers or occasionally, writing down equations. And my colleagues who work on other areas, especially the more sort of hardcore theory people, spend a lot of their day like paired up in front of a blackboard writing down equations and sort of having a discussion via the mathematics of the theory that they're working on. I don't do that as much, but when I do meet with my colleagues, there's usually a blackboard involved because we need to write down our equations and our plots and everything. So there are a lot of blackboards in my institute. It's kind of famous for the number of blackboards we have because we're a theoretical physics institute. So there's a lot of that. And even like when you go to lunch, we have a little bistro in our institute, and there are little paper holders and pencil holders on each of the tables, and little slips of paper that you can use to write down your equations when you're talking to your colleagues over lunch. So like we're always prepared.
That's fantastic.
So you don't have to use the napkin.
And are they still chalkboards, not dry erase?
Oh yeah, no, they're chalkboards. Yeah, yeah. No, so theoretical physicists in general vastly prefer chalkboards. But
why
it's
really,
is
this? I'm curious.
I mean, I think it's a few things. It's annoying to deal with pens that are running out of ink, and like it's annoying to get the ink on your fingers when you're using these things a lot. And we have really good chalk, and we have really high quality chalkboards, and it's just more satisfying. Some of the chalkboards have colored chalk, so we can still do different colors and things. But it's really funny because there's an institute for quantum computation down the road that our institute has a lot of interaction with because we have a lot of quantum computing people at the Perimeter Institute. And the quantum computation people, that's all whiteboards. Oh. So you go over there and it's the whiteboards, but at the Theoretical Physics Institute we're the blackboards.
It's fascinating because I had no idea that this was a split that existed in the world, and my mind's blown. So okay, so you use Python, you use C and C++, like any other. We always ask people what kind of tools they use on the day to day. Like, does the computation you do, can it comfortably live inside a laptop or a desktop computer or whatever? Or you do have like heavy metal someplace offsite that you can connect to if you need to? Yeah.
So for the stuff I do, it's usually on the laptop. I occasionally use Mathematica as well, just for different kinds of computations. Yeah, but we do have access to high performance computing clusters. So there are some at Perimeter Institute. There are some that I have access to through my my affiliation with North Carolina State, and my students use the NC State cluster a lot. And so yeah, a lot of the computations are just complicated and take a while. And so if we can do them on the HPCs, then that's better. But I don't personally do any of the sort of big simulations, like numerical simulations that are that require banks and banks of cores. Like some of my colleagues do those, where you get these simulations of galaxy formation where you can see the gas swirling in, and those are massive, and those are take a long time. Or things in like numerical relativity where they're solving general relativity equations for like black hole collisions. Those take a lot more computing power, but the stuff that I do is usually not quite so intense.
Since you mentioned the chalkboards versus dry erase, I have to ask the computer version of that. Is there a preference for operating systems among you and your colleagues, or across different institutes in terms of? I'm just curious.
Most of us have Macs, but I think because it's so easy to do command line stuff and things like that with the Mac. Very few people would use Windows, for example. But yeah, most of us have Macs.
I wanted to ask a question about something you touched on earlier, which is the ongoing attempt to kind of unify gravitation and quantum mechanics. I guess what I really want to ask is, am I looking at this the right way? Like, as sort of, you had like Newton's mechanics, and then you had relativity. Like, is it accurate or fair to look at that as the sort of next big step in understanding, or is that too grandiose a way to look at that as a milestone? No,
I think that's reasonable. So yeah, one of the things that I talk about a lot when I talk to people about, like, when we go from one theory to another, as our understanding changes, is we're not disproving the previous model per se. So, for example, going from Newton's mechanics to general relativity is not saying that if you roll a ball down a hill, Newton's laws are not going to give you the answer to what that looks like, right? It would be ridiculous to use the equations of general relativity to calculate how a ball rolls down a hill. You could probably do it. You'd probably make mistakes somewhere, and if you didn't, you wouldn't. The accuracy you get from that is not going to be better from Newton's equations, because there are other things that are, like the sources of error are much bigger than the differences between those two calculations. So Newton's mechanics is entirely correct in the regimes that we use it for, in the appropriate regimes, and that continues to be true, even though we have general relativity for regimes like when you're really close to the sun and the orbit of Mercury is perturbed by general relativistic effects. So you can't use Newton's mechanics to calculate the orbit of Mercury, because that's in a regime where the general relativity aspects become really important. So in the same way, quantum mechanics and general relativity work great in the regimes that we generally use them for. The only places where there's going to be problems with those two things is in places like the center of a black hole, or the very, very early universe, or places where we think that that both of those might be important to what's happening, and then we would need to find a way to connect them. But if you just talk about, all the regimes we use quantum mechanics to talk about, general relativity is completely unimportant. And all the regimes in which we use general relativity to talk about what's happening, quantum mechanics is completely unimportant. And so what we're trying to do is find something that works in those regimes where the two come together potentially, because that's where they disagree. But it doesn't mean that either of those models is going to be wrong, right? And even if we came up with some new theory that was a totally different formulation than general relativity, a totally different formulation than quantum mechanics, we could still use GR and quantum mechanics as effective theories in the regimes that we use them for now, because they currently work great. They pass all of the observational tests in all the experiments that we do right now. So it's one of these things where if we did find a quantum gravity theory and we're able to sort of confirm it, then that would give us the possibility to reach out into those new regimes and learn something new about maybe the structure of physics on at a different level and a different energy scale. But you're always going to have these effective theories in the regimes that we currently use them, and Newton's laws are always going to work for a ball rolling down a hill. We're never gonna throw that out and say like, no, that's the wrong equation, right? So it's So I think that yeah, I don't think it's grandiose to say that this is the next big thing. I mean, quantum gravity is very much a sort of holy grail for theoretical physics, and there are a lot of people working on that. A lot of people working on that where I'm at the Perimeter Institute. There's, it's a really, really important question for our understanding of the universe, our understanding of the beginning of the universe, our understanding of these extreme environments in the universe. But it's it's not gonna prove wrong everything that we've already done.
Katie, thank you so much. It's so good to
welcome.
Spend time with you and to talk about the end of the universe and the insides of black holes and all the things that impact us so much on the day to day. Where can people find out more about you and your work?
Yeah. So my website is astrokatie.com. That's Katie spelled Katie. So I've got a lot of stuff there. I'm on Twitter as @astrokatie, although Twitter is dying. So I don't know. I'm posting there a little less than I used to.
Whole other topic these days, it turns out.
Yeah. I'm also on Instagram as Katie Mack because somebody else had the Astrokatie handle. So anyway, and I'm on Blue Sky now, and on Blue Sky I'm connected to my URL astrokatie.com, so you can find me there that way. I even do some stuff on TikTok a little bit. It's Astrokatie Mack on TikTok. So I have a few little videos about like the first light of the universe and like. I have one about using static electricity to bend the water in my faucet, just because I had a lot of fun with that one day. So there's stuff kind of everywhere.
Thank you so much, Katie, for coming by. This was absolutely fantastic. We could have spent another 2 or 3 hours talking about this, I think, before we ran out of time there. But
honestly, like when we started this podcast, like talk to a working astrophysicist was like right at the top of the list of things I would like to do with it. So it's really been an honor to get to talk to her and draw on her extremely extensive knowledge.
As always, if you're new to the show, this is a listener supported podcast. We have a Patreon at patreon.com/techpod, where if you would like to support the show for $5 a month, you can. And you also get access to our patron exclusive episode every month where we talk about usually more technological stuff. So usually it's stuff like, what's going on in computers or what we're working on, projects that we have in development, maybe future episodes that we're doing research on, stuff like that. And you can find out about that again at patreon.com/techpod. As always, at the end of the show, we thank our executive producer tier patrons, including Nick Johnston, Paddle Creek Games, makers of Fractured Veil, Andrew Slosky, Brad's Midsize Hoodoo Voodoo Switcheroo, Octothorpe Bunny Crimes, Just Wedge, Joel Krauska, Twinkle Twinkie, David Allen, and James Kamek. Thank you all so much. I forgot the best part about the Patreon is you get access to the fabulous TechPod Discord as well.
That's right. A fount of knowledge, both technical and non.
Information constantly on all topics. I've quite enjoyed the gardening channel, which we opened up a couple weeks ago. And people are coming in and sharing their good stuff. And to steal a good bit from our friends over at the Daily Tech News Show, welcome to our newest patron, Woodhop. Thanks for supporting the show, Woodhop. We appreciate you.
Woodhop.
So thanks to Katie. Make sure you check her out on socials or go to astrokatie.com. And we will see you all next week. Thanks for listening, everybody.